Hey guys, welcome back. This is the story about what if Naruto was a hollow. Before we start, please subscribe to the channel and like the video as well, it really means a lot. So let's start the what if. Are you sure you want to do this, Sarutobi? Shinji asked. The old visored nodded his head, his back turned to his friend and de facto leader. He wouldn't have called his life since becoming a visored boring, but he felt obligated. Not so much for the Soul Society, but for the people he knew and loved during his life in Konoha. I'm positive. Are you sure I can't change your mind, Shinji? All of you. Hiruzen looked around at the other visored. They all shared solemn looks. Shinji raised an eyebrow and then sighed. Not a damn chance, Hiruzen. Aizen is dead, so this doesn't have anything to do with us anymore. I'm sorry, but you're gonna have to fly solo on this one. I know you still have an attachment to that place, what with your friends in life. But we just can't go with you this time. Hiruzen nodded. I understand. He said, disappointment right throughout his voice. Shinji didn't say anything as the old man stepped out of their warehouse hideout and into the light. Suppress. Brujeria. A somewhat injured Zamari did not look happy as he was forced to release his Zanpakuto after being ganged up on by 7 separate vice-captains at once. In fact, he looked downright livid. His mouth was turned down into a sneer as he was wrapped in a smoky ryatsu. The 7 vice-captains tensed and dug their feet into the shingles of the roof as he changed, and his ryatsu got heavier. What is this? Renji asked himself, and while he was perplexed over Zamari's resurrection, he also took the time to note the other vice-captains around. Himself, Hisagi, Hinamori, Ranjaku, Omida, Iba, and Isane. Those were the vice-captains who had decided to attend the meeting, and consequently the ones who were forced to fight the Arrancar. All in all, not a bad lineup, but for some reason Renji wished he had more. What do we do, Renji? We've barely managed to injure him, and he's bound to get stronger in his release. Iba called out from the side. Renji glared over at him. I know, okay. We need use all of our strengths at once if we want to stand a chance at defeating this Arrancar. Pour all your ryatsu into your Zanpakutos and be prepared for what's coming next. I have to work together with you scumbags. Omida Marichio piped up from the side. The rest of the group ignored him, as Zamari was just emerging from the smoky ryatsu. His resurrection wasn't the most intimidating thing in the world. He looked like a man projecting out of a pinkish pumpkin of sorts covered in sets of eyes, but that didn't mean the vice-captains let their guards down. They still had no idea what he could do in this state. He spread his hands apart, and the eyes on his palms and several more on his body began to light up. The 7 vice-captains tensed, and there was a quick burst of light that they couldn't even react to. Renji had anticipated that the light wasn't anything good, so he was the only one who was able to react and avoid whatever it was that Zamari had just fired at them. The eyes on the Octava's body stayed lit up, their pupils stayed intensely dilated, even as Zamari broke his stance and did not fire off any more bursts of light. What happened? Renji asked, more to his comrades than Zamari. The other 6 of them looked around at themselves, but they couldn't sense any apparent change. Zamari smiled an evil smile, before he hissed at them. A shame. It has already happened. It was at that point that Renji noticed something bizarre. Omida. Hinamori. Ranjaku. Hisagi. Nano. Iba, they all had one thing in common. The strange black markings that had appeared somewhere on their bodies. I have managed to capture 6 of the 7 of you. A pity. I had hoped to finish this in one attack, Zamari noted. What do you mean, captured? You haven't done anything yet. Renji called out. Zamari simply sighed. You don't get it, do you? I suppose an apt demonstration is required. The Arrancar said, closing his eyes and concentrating Ryatsu into the 6 eyes that were apparently glowing. Raise your right arm, number 1, he responded. He exerted Ryatsu on an eye in the top right half of his chest. Over on the other side of things, Ranjaku raised her right arm, her sword pointing dangerously at the others. Renji noted that Ranjaku's right arm was the one that held the strange sun-like symbol. Eh? What's going on? The confused woman stated. Honestly, that question was what all of them should have been asking, especially when they saw Ranjaku swung her sword at Hisagi. What are you doing, Matsumoto? Hisagi called out. He was unprepared for the direct strike from his comrade, but he still managed to avoid it even as she came out swinging. I don't know. My body's not listening to me, she cried back, going in for a second strike. Stop! Hisagi cried out, preparing to bounce away from the slash. Zamari raised his eyebrows, and Hisagi's left leg buckled out from underneath him as he was about to dodge. He lost his balance and fell onto the ground, and could do nothing as the oncoming Zanpakuto came in on him. Blood erupted from his mouth and chest as the sharp blade slashed Hisagi clean through the torso. He flopped to the ground uselessly, near dead, his eyes bulging in terror. His hands trembled heavily, as they moved to clutch the leg that had failed him. Blood continued to leak from his wound, but the only thing Hisagi was concerned about was his leg, which had refused to obey him, and had essentially caused him to sustain that injury. Hisagi! Renji shouted, while the rest of the vice-captains suddenly became very concerned about how they were going to win this battle. It had gone from 7-on-1 to 6-on-1, and according to Zamari, he had most of them under his control. Have you grasped my abilities yet, pitiful vice-captains? Zamari asked. He hadn't lifted a finger ever since he gained control of them. None of them answered, and instead just stared at the espada warily. I will tell you. My ability is called Amor. Amor allows me to steal that sovereignty over any object I want. Every single thing in the universe has something that reigns over it. My Amor allows me to change it and take control of the sovereignty myself. For example, the limbs of your body. He pointed out, motioning to Hisagi's leg. Renji seemed to have figured out that he was the only one who wasn't underneath the control of Zamari. Well, you still haven't been able to control me, he roared. Howl, Zabumaru, he shouted, activating his shurikai once again and swinging the extending blade towards Zamari. Zamari stared stoically at Renji, before Hinamori flashed into existence right in front of him and blocked Zabumaru with her own tobium. Hinamori! Renji cried out. Zamari smiled. I forgot to mention this, but if I take control of the head, then the entire body does my bidding. Indeed, there was a sun-shaped marking on Hinamori's forehead. Her eyes, however, were darting back and forth in confusion and fear, as she realized what was happening. Abarekuen. I can't control any part of my body, she squealed. Renji knew it was coming, but he was still unnerved by how Hinamori's body moved underneath Zamari's control. Hinamori shrieked in alarm and despair as the Amor ability forced her to raise both of her arms, swinging wildly at Renji. Renji avoided the strikes easily, but he was still struggling on how to attack back without injuring Hinamori. Tobium, the controlled Hinamori shouted, a ball of fire charging in the tip of Shurikai. Renji grunted in irritation, but fell back even as 3 of the other vice-captains held the Rouge vice-captain down. All of you! Renji cried. How are you able to move underneath his control? He asked. He recalled that the Arrancar had gotten all of them save him, so at the very least they should have one of their limbs incapacitated. The 6th Division's vice-captain looked down, to Omiyata's right leg, Iba's left arm, and Ranjaku's right arm. There was a single similarity between all 3 of them. On the affected extremities, there were clearly self-inflicted wounds that created small gashes over where the tendons were. You guys! Renji said, biting his lip. They had cut their tendons and made one of their limbs essentially useless, and they were moving about at a much slower pace because of it. Hinamori shrieked and threw all of them off her through Zamari's command. Then, she put her own sword to her neck, causing the others to pause in their renewed effort. Don't move! Any of you! Zamari roared from behind the entire group of vice captains. Tears began to run down Hinamori's face, as her grip tightened around her sword. "I will end this myself," Zamari said. He clasped his hands together, even though he did not have a sword anymore. Resurrección Segunda Etapa, Brujeria. As Zamari activated his second release, the vice captains knew that it was almost hopeless for them. One of them had already fallen underneath his control, and as his Ryatsu increased significantly, they had no plans. "My Sonido is among the fastest of all Arrancar." Zamari began speaking, as his body began to morph once again. "Yet, when I enter my first release, I sacrifice a great deal of my own mobility for the power of Amor. In other words, my Sonido is no longer the fastest once I enter my release state. Obviously, a weakness like that should be considered unacceptable." The pumpkin-like abdomen began to disappear. "And through entering my Resurrección Segunda Etapa, I can eliminate that weakness, and regain the speed that I had previously lost. With my Sonido and the power of Amor, I have no weaknesses." The pumpkin had disappeared completely. Growing over it in its place was bony material that had already covered his torso. His legs were covered in eyes too, but they had a sleek, mobile appearance which was vastly different than before. A row of spikes circling his hips and groin protected the eyes from being attacked. "And I can fire my Amor at a much quicker rate." He flashed out of existence. Renji deflated, as he could barely pick up on where the Octava Espada was going to appear next. In fact, Zamari apparently wasn't going for him right now, as he darted right in front of IBA. His dark-skinned hand obstructed IBA's view, as the eye in its palm fired another burst of light. IBA was caught off guard by the Espada's speed, and could do nothing as his Amor attached itself to his head, giving total control over his body. He began to move, much like Hinamori did, though he was still clearly in control of his mind even as his body disobeyed. "Ugh! Damn it," he screamed in frustration, attacking his own comrades from every possible angle. Zamari seemed to have him tuned onto Omida in particular, and the bulky vice captain was already hindered underneath the weight of Zamari's Amor. Bankai! Renji had clearly had quite enough of the cowardly tactics of the Arrancar, and activated his Bankai in the face of overwhelming odds. 2 of his 6 comrades had fallen underneath the Arrancar's spell, 1 was incapacitated, and the rest were partially underneath the spell. It was time to stop holding back. "Stop it, Abarai!" Ibith called out. It was too late. Renji had already activated his Bankai in full, bringing out the bamboo snake king characteristic of Zabumaru. The gigantic snake roared its battle cry, looking towards its master. Renji himself was dressed in a baboon fur-like shawl, his right arm turned into a monkey's hand, which was clutching the tail of the giant bamboo snake. Hihio Zabumaru. Renji didn't seem to get to do more than show off, because Zamari was behind him immediately after his pose, firing Amor after Amor. He hit 3 segments of the snake, not attacking Renji himself in the slightest. A very poor decision. "Bringing out a Bankai such as that which I control will cost you, all of you dearly," Zamari remarked. The snake seemed to struggle in place, before directly obeying Zamari. Even though Zamari hadn't hit the head, it was like the Bankai's entire sovereignty was stolen just by being hit on one of its segments. Zamari noticed this. Interesting. It seems that this creature is regarded as one being, despite the fact that it is made of multiple segments. It certainly makes my job all the easier. And with that, the Bankai turned on its master. It slammed down, and Renji cried out in alarm as his giant Bankai impacted the ground near him, nearly shattering the roof of the building in half and flinging shingles every which way. "Abara!" IBA cried out, still extremely handicapped due to the lack of control over his body. He couldn't do anything. None of them could. "Ugh!" IBA yelled. While he was calling out to Renji, the other vice captain's Bankai had taken the opportunity to swing its tail across the side. Without even being able to move, the 7th Division's vice captain was helpless as the tail slammed into his side, knocking the wind out of him and throwing his body off of the roof. IBA! Renji shouted. And then, there were 4 of them. 4 of the original 7 were the only ones capable of fighting now, and by the looks of things, 3 of them were completely incapacitated. Renji seemed to realize that enough was enough, and moved to call back his Bankai. Nothing occurred, it was completely underneath Zamari's control. Shit, he called out. The snake roared again, and Zamari surveyed the remaining vice-captains. Hinamori, IBA, and Hisagi had been incapacitated, which left just Renji, Nanao, Ranjaku, and Omida. Of those 4, only Renji was not underneath the Espada's control. Abarai Fukatecho, please call back your Bankai. Nanao called out to him. She at least didn't bring her Zanpakuto, so it wasn't like he was at any risk of suddenly being slashed at. Nevertheless, he would have to watch out if she started lobbing Kido at him. I can't. His ability won't let me, he called out. The controlled Bankai began to attack again. It bucked and thrashed in place, even as Zamari began to control it. He chuckled. It is no use, my lowly vice-captains. Most of you are already underneath my amour, and the 4th member of your crew has had his abilities nullified. I think it would be best to surrender at this point, and understand that you have lost. And let Soul Society be overrun with you Arankars. Not a chance. Renji shouted back. I admire your zeal, but tell me, what can you possibly do at this point without your Zanpakuto? Try me. Renji roared, grabbing the hilt of his Zanpakuto. Zamari grimaced as Renji picked it up, and through a method that Zamari did not understand, he regained control over it once again. Split! Hihio Zabumaru! The snake roared, before its Ryatsu bonds broke apart and the bamboo snake burst into its component segments, each one acting individually in and of itself. What is this? Zamari cried out in surprise, as he felt control being lost over the Bankai. Actually, that wasn't quite entirely true. As the segments were hovering around in midair, he found he could control just 3 of dozens of segments. The ones with his amour symbol on them. He had gotten careless. You thought you could take control of my Bankai like that, didn't you? If you had gone for the head and taken control of that, you could have probably controlled the whole of it. But you didn't. Instead, you simply took control of a few small segments of the entire Bankai. Renji pointed out. Wait, don't tell me. Still confused on why on my Bankai was obeying your commands. It's simple, I staged it. Renji yelled. I purposefully moved it to where you wanted it to go, to give you the idea that you were in complete control of it. Zamari looked livid once again, and all of the eyes across his body opened once again, flashing their purplish glow as they began to target Renji himself for the first time. Die! Take it! Take your stupid Bankai back and succumb to my amour! Zamari shouted, firing blast after blast of amour. Renji simply levitated one of his Bankai's segments to shield him. The downside for him was that Zamari gained control of one more part of his Bankai, but there were still many more where that came from. He concentrated his Ryatsu, and the segments hovered over Zamari. Higa Zeku. His expanded Bankai's version of his Shirkai's special ability loomed over Zamari's head, magenta spears of Ryatsu forming where the bamboo segments were once. This pathetic amour! Zamari shouted, firing all his blasts of amour as the disbanded pieces of Ryatsu. Pure Ryuryoku didn't seem to be something that he could control, however, and his amour failed to steal the sovereignty. The blades of Ryatsu thrust down on Zamari, even as the Octava drew himself into his defensive sphere. They impacted the outermost portion of his sphere, puncturing the hide. Blood leaked from the sphere. The attack was powerful. Much more powerful than it had been 10 years ago, and Renji was no longer a vice-captain level Shinigami, regardless of whether he still held the rank. Well done, Abarai Fukatecho. Nanao pointed out. That Arankar's arrogance was his downfall, and he has paid it. Feeling is already returning to my limbs, and I can see it is the same with the rest of the still active vice-captains. This is unforgivable, the sphere that was Zamari shouted, while blood leaked out of his body. The sphere retracted like petals falling off a flower, and the streamlined form of Zamari's segunda etapa emerged. Yet, he was heavily injured. "You're still alive?" "Can't say I'm surprised," Renji said. The Octava Espada was furious, far more so than he had been before, but roughly half of his eyes had been disabled. "You're gonna pay for this. I've had enough of toying with you. Prepare to succumb to my amour, and be used to kill your own comrades throughout Seirede," he roared. "You don't get it, do you?" Nanao piped up. The dark-skinned Arrancar made no indication that he heard her. He fired a desperate amour towards Renji, but a Bakudo-type Kido sprung up around Renji, blocking the amour. "You've already lost. Give it up," Ranjaku said, as the remaining 4 vice-captains fell into line with one another, slowly and dreadfully walking towards the wounded Zamari. "No! I will not lose to lowly vice-captains such as you," he screamed. He tried to use Sonido to get away, but he was so heavily injured that he was rendered immobile. The vice-captains did not change their expressions, as all of them, even Nanao, drew their swords. The 4 of them hovered over Zamari, whose amour was now completely useless. They all raised the swords above their heads in unison, and slashed them down on Zamari. The swords sliced the Octava Espada to ribbons, and a torrent of blood flowed out onto the rooftop as he was butchered into smaller and smaller pieces by the remaining vice-captains. "You're dead, kid." Grimmjow wasn't smiling as the air itself began to burn, but he knew instantly that once that air became hot enough, the battle between him and Hitsugaya would be over. "See, your Bankai is melting. Guess your captain commander didn't realize that some of his soldiers would be negatively affected should he try and use his Bankai. But it doesn't matter." Hitsugaya Taicho, a Shinigami, shouted at him. The voice sounded rather weak, considering that the rest of his squad was getting manhandled by Konohamaru. Nevertheless, Hitsugaya did not pay any attention to them. He was more concerned about the water dripping from his back, as the ice from his Bankai became completely useless water. Grimmjow also seemed to be affected by the power of Yamamoto's Bankai, but he didn't suffer any drop in his abilities by being near it. With Hitsugaya in nothing but his sealed state, the captain was hopelessly outclassed by the Septima. Hitsugaya looked for any exit he could, or any attack he could use in his sealed state that would help him fight this Arrancar. Meanwhile, almost all of his men had been decimated by Konohamaru. He stared at Grimmjow, who was charging up his Ryatsu, and he struggled to figure out what to do. Before he could even react, the speedy Arrancar entered his guard without a hint of hesitation. The child prodigy captain was promptly slashed down. Zanka no Tachi. Naruto's breathing began to increase dramatically, as the air around him began to heat up significantly. Being this close to Yamamoto's Bankai, it was like he was inhaling fire. Nevertheless, the true form of Yamamoto's Bankai was not very impressive. Usually, Bankais are something large and impressive, but Naruto saw that all Yamamoto was holding was a short katana, heavily scorched by fire. A dim flame was rising up from its blades, and appearance-wise it did not look all that threatening. The heat in the air seemed to tell a different story. When Yamamoto activated his Bankai, Naruto felt several Ryatsus disappear at once. Damn, Zamari's down too, it looks like. I'm more shocked at the Ryatsu level of those who defeated him, but I guess he let his arrogance get the best of him. Still, that leaves just 7 Espada now. I wasn't expecting to lose that many. He commented to himself, even as another captain's Ryatsu disappeared, from over where he felt Grimmjow's Ryatsu. Are you just gonna sit there and stall? Your captains are dying left and right, and we've just about beaten you. If you truly want to win, you'll have to take me out right here and right now. Whoa! Naruto grunted in alarm as Yamamoto swung his sword at him. Using his full speed, he dodged to the right. It did not touch his body, but the blade did clip the edge of his robe, and a large portion where it touched was instantly obliterated. There were no flames. Naruto whistled, but when he opened his mouth he coughed on the heated air. Damn, just being around you makes me feel like I'm going to lose. I'm not even sure I have a response for this. Naruto said. He would just have to dodge at this point. Zanka no Tachi, Higashi, Kyoku Jitsujin. Yamamoto cried, slashing at Naruto yet again. The sword impacted into the ground, creating a giant crater after it obliterated the stone the instant it touched it. Naruto was nowhere to seen. Zero Corazon. Naruto slipped inside his guard, his cutlass glowing a deep orange. Zanka no Tachi, Nishi, Zanjitsu Goki. Yamamoto roared, though nothing happened. Naruto felt his Ryatsu rise, but there were no changes. Regardless, Naruto steered away his attack on Yamamoto, and used Sonido to dart away from Yamamoto. When he touched down around 10 feet away from Yamamoto, he grabbed his sword and slashed a deep line in the stone. 10 feet away from Yamamoto, he would have to retain his distance. That Bankai, it produces so much heat that his signature flames are not visible anymore. He incinerated the hem of my robe with such heat that it can no longer produce flames. He's wreathing himself in that same heat right now. I can feel it, it's burning me up. But if I so much as touch him right now, I'd be obliterated. Shit! Naruto cursed, as Yamamoto began to attack once again. A flurry of strikes almost too fast for Naruto to comprehend came at him, as Yamamoto wielded his blade with an incredible amount of expertise. And Naruto had to avoid them all. One slightest little touch on any area of his skin, and he would be obliterated instantly. He doubted even his incredibly tough arrow would be able to stand up to this level of heat. He contorted his body from left to right and ducked underneath multiple strikes, not even daring to parry with his sword. Yamamoto swung out a foot which hit Naruto in the gut, and the Primera Espada found his arrow breaking underneath the powerful strike. His attacks were fluid, and there was absolutely no wasted movement by the Captain Commander of Soul Society. Naruto wanted to make an experiment. Listlessly, he fired one of his normal orange zeros at Yamamoto. The Captain Commander did not even bother dodging or deflecting the blast. Rather, he just stood in the center of the area. The blast impacted with Yamamoto, but the heat around him was so great that he even managed to incinerate a zero. That's one effective shield. Naruto muttered to himself. He jumped into mid-air, trying to get a better vantage point with which he could attack. Perhaps he had to. Perhaps not, though. He just had to wait for the important moment, and at that point, everything would be tipped in his favor. He just had to stall Yamamoto for the time being. If he fell, then the old Shinigami would be free to stick it to the rest of his forces. He gripped his sword, perhaps he could manipulate the Ryatsu around him. He focused in on Yamamoto's Ryatsu from his perch in midair, and it nearly seared his entire core. With Yamamoto's Shurikai, he had felt a slight heat as he manipulated the Ryu-Ryoku, yet his Bankai's Ryu-Ryoku was a searing heat far beyond that. It seemed that manipulating it was dangerous even to the one in charge. There was no way Naruto could manipulate it if that were the case. Zero Venenoso, he shouted in midair, firing the glob of poison down upon Yamamoto. Like with the previous Zero, the poison was burned away by Yamamoto's wreath. He latched himself onto the roof of the 1st Division's barracks, scrambling along the shingles as he attempted to get to a better place to fight. The balcony wasn't working, he needed a more open area. A massive chimney lay before him, and the Primera Espada used it as shelter to shield him from the oncoming Captain Commander. Speaking of which, the Captain Commander himself had taken to the roof, his sword hanging at his side. He already knew how to attack Naruto. Zanka no Tachi, Higashi, Kyoku Jitsujin, he roared as he attacked. While his other attacks did not produce any flames, this was one different. It was still as hot as the others, but with the blast came a pillar of massive horizontal flames that barreled toward their target. Naruto was able to pick up on them this time, when he felt the heat from the Ryu-Ryoku begin to barrel its way toward him. He winced and grimaced while still hunkered down by the massive chimney, and he knew that the stone structure was nowhere near resilient enough to shield him from the oncoming blast. The blast of fire and heat bore through the chimney where Naruto was hiding, but Yamamoto's eyes narrowed when he felt a spike of Ryatsu coming from where Naruto was. He had attacked the Eren car, and should have seemingly incinerated him, But that wasn't what the leader of Soul Society felt. He was always able to feel the Ryoryoku behind his attacks, but when the blast of fire impacted the chimney and incinerated it, it was like it was not there anymore. His eyes were telling him similar things. It was like the blast of fire was being fed into the mouth of a massive void, and disappearing into its depths. Whatever the case, he knew that his last attack had not been effective against the Eren car. The smoke and dust concealed Naruto from view, but Yamamoto knew from the strong Ryatsu that the Eren car was still up there. And he seemed different. At one point, he had the Ryatsu that Yamamoto was used to feeling throughout the fight. Then, for a few seconds, there was a gigantic spike in his Ryatsu, similar to when a Shinigami moved from Shurkai to Bankai, but as soon as it had arrived, it was gone, and was back to where Yamamoto had felt it earlier. Hot damn! That's some incredible Ryatsu. It was so hot, I thought I was gonna burn up from feeling it. Woo! Naruto's voice resounded from down below. It was a lot different than when Yamamoto had heard it earlier, much more deranged. But is that all? I'm afraid you will no longer have access to your Bankai at this point. Naruto whooped, as another new face warped into the space directly behind Yamamoto, catching even the ancient captain off guard. Wonder Weiss! Naruto ordered. The young-looking Eren car left behind from Aizen's era had entered his Resurrection, the strange extinguer that made him look resoundingly alien. The old captain swung his sword to the left, aiming to exterminate the Eren car before he could even get in the sneak attack that he had been so apt to have done. Wonder Weiss reached out a white hand and grasped the blade of Yamamoto's Zanpakuto. Where the Eren car should have been obliterated by the captain's Bankai, nothing of the sort had occurred. He could only watch as his Bankai hissed from the heat, yet as soon as he touched the Eren car, he knew that any attack power had left his Zanpakuto. The modified Eren car simply needed to touch his Zanpakuto once, and with that, his job was over. He did not make any move to attack Yamamoto, simply hovering in midair as Yamamoto punched him away with his free arm when he did not attack. Wonder Weiss was not fazed. Naruto was walking out of his hiding place, a slight twitch in his eye. His hair was messy and unkempt, and his eyes were wide with bloodthirst and lunacy. His sharp teeth were bared. "What did you do?" Yamamoto asked, his voice calm. However, he was gripping his useless Zanpakuto in his hands furiously, but no fire welled up from within. Naruto continued to twitch. "Oh, that? Well, I guess it'd be alright to tell you what happened. You see him?" He pointed dramatically down at Wonder Weiss, who was lying motionless on the balcony below. "He's a remnant of the time when Aizen ruled. Aizen managed to develop the first and only modified Eren car. With that, everything else was removed from him for one sole purpose: neutralize Yamamoto Genryusai Shigekuni's Zanpakuto." "I see. Aizen has left some very nasty devices for you to work with. However..." He shot up, crashing down onto the roof, sending wooden splinters flying everywhere. His fists were cocked, their muscles bulging as he abandoned his Haori to compensate for a much more physical fighting style. "I have led the Soul Society for over 1,000 years, and in that time there has been absolutely no one who has been able to surpass my abilities as a Shinigami. Losing the ability to use my Ryujin Jaka does not make me helpless, boy." Yamamoto snarled, his fists clenching as Wonder Weiss got to his feet without so much as a fuss. Naruto snickered, his twitching not subsiding yet. "Ha! Well, you SNRRK can't just sit there and SNRRK expect to fight Wonder Weiss. Now isn't SNRK the time for that, you know. We've got a status quo to upkeep, so..." Naruto hissed, as he leapt down from his perch and crashed directly in between both Yamamoto and Wonder Weiss. "It'd be one thing to fight Wonder Weiss, but do you honestly expect that you can beat me without your Zanpakuto?" Yamamoto said nothing. He didn't even show any signs of emotion, other than complete determination in defeating his foe. Ikatsu. There was nothing fancy about Yamamoto's punch. No technique more than a straightforward punch that went sailing towards Naruto as the Eren car went on the offensive. Yet, the punch was so quick, and so strong, and Naruto knew the type of damage that Hakuta from the Captain Commander of Soul Society would do. Just as the punch was about to hit, Naruto directly sidestepped the punch using a combination of agility and sonido, but even the wind from the punch was strong enough to disorient Naruto slightly. Naruto swung his cutlass at the bare-handed Yamamoto, directing a flurry of slashes with the intent of killing him. The Captain Commander skillfully managed to avoid or counter them all, though his bare fists were not sufficient enough to touch Naruto's blade without getting injured. Yamamoto grunted as Naruto reared back and shoved the hilt of his sword into his stomach, sending the old captain skidding back several meters. His trained eyes turned to the sky immediately when he registered movement. Naruto was overhead, prepared to swoop down on him, using the sun overhead to try and blind Yamamoto. "Zero Corazon," he roared, as the hilt of his cutlass glowed orange once again. He swung down in midair, a jet of orange Zero zigzagging down towards Yamamoto. The old captain avoided it as the bladed Zero cut a line directly through the enormous balcony they were. He then ducked underneath a swipe from Naruto, which created yet another trail of Zero where he cut the air. However, he left himself open. "Sakatsu!" Yamamoto roared, putting both of his hands together to make a powerful double punch that likely would have killed even Naruto. The Primera Espada put up his sword to block the punches as both fists impacted the blade. The energy of the Zero on it seared Yamamoto's fists, but the pressure almost snapped Naruto's Zanpakuto clean in two. "Arg!" Naruto snarled. He was pushed back by the Sakatsu, but regained his balance fairly easily. The old man still was very capable even without his Zanpakuto, but it was only a matter of time now. The fires around Seirete crackled in the background, and Naruto couldn't help but make a little jab at Yamamoto. "Does it bother you? Seeing your precious Seirete in such a state? Several of your captains are dead by now, but you must really have a heart of ice if you can shrug off their deaths so easily." Wonder Weiss moaned over to the side. "Well, you're able to hold your own at least, but it won't be long now. I might as well finish this," he said. "With my third and final form of Zero." He finished, sheathing his sword. He clapped both of his hands together, before pulling them apart. Strings of orange Ryuryoku connected his palms together, and as he twisted his palms in a rotation, the strands of Ryuryoku became more like a spiral. Zero Espiral. Before he could release the Zero, something occurred. Just like with Wonder Weiss, a new figure appeared on the battlefield out of nowhere, though the new arrival merely stood there, and did not attempt to take either of the two fighters. When Naruto saw the figure, his face lit up in a wide smile. When Yamamoto saw it, his face blanched. "Ulquiorra!" Naruto called out, as his second-in-command brushed off his robes from the recent sonido and calmly regarded both his ruler and the leader of Soul Society. He said just one thing. "All of the keys have been gathered." Naruto grinned evilly, but this was also the first time in the battle where Yamamoto showed even the slightest amount of fear. If his Zanpakuto were not disabled, he likely would have incinerated Ulquiorra on the spot. "You? How did you know about that?" Yamamoto asked. Ulquiorra didn't say anything. "Allow me to explain it to you, old fucker. We know the purpose of those keys, that you have spent the last 1,000 years keeping your captains in the dark about. But we have the information." Naruto cackled. "Tell me, do you remember a hollow named Reporo?" he asked suddenly, a sinister smile widening on Naruto's face. Yamamoto didn't know what he was talking about, until the memories flooded back. Yes, that legendary hollow, he invaded the Soul Society all those years ago. He managed to steal the keys from the captains, but I managed to stop him from fulfilling his goals. Don't tell me. Reporo is long dead, but his legacy still echoes throughout Huecomundo. Naruto started. He pulled 2 keys out of his pocket, one with the number 2, and the other with the number 11. You really should investigate Huecomundo more often. I know you Shinigami believe us to be nothing more than a conglomeration of mindless hollows, but we are so much more than that. We leave legacies just like humans, and before Reporo died, he wrote a book, which he hid in his legendary empire for anyone who might stumble across it. And that someone happened to be me. That scum, he detailed the things he discovered during his incursion. Yamamoto commented. I really do have to thank him. The book, El Libro de Ciclos, documents practically every aspect of Hollow life, and was a travel journal of sorts for Reporo. We have managed to crack the secrets of Arancarization thanks to him, but more important, we have discovered what purpose those keys hold. He sighed wistfully. If we hold on to them, they can change everything. Naruto shot his hand out, catching a massive punch from the disabled captain, whose face was a picture of pure rage. You're getting ahead of yourself, boy. Those keys are an important tradition within Soul Society that allows for the balance of power to be maintained within the branches of Soul Society. Without the Royal Guard, you cannot fulfill your purpose. Without the Royal Guard, you cannot even enter the palace where that machine lies. Yamamoto roared. Naruto only smirked. Don't you worry about that, old man. We've already got it covered. In fact, look. Naruto pointed. Yamamoto didn't want to give this tricky hollow any leeway, but out of the corner of his eye, he saw a massive pillar making its way down from the heavens, on clear course to the Soul Society. The Tenchurin. This cannot be. Naruto looked like Christmas had come early. So, Sakura made due on her promise. We can advance to the royal palace. Naruto shouted. With a cry of victory, he roared to the heavens, a hollow-like roar that reverberated through the Soul Society. The others have arrived, Naruto. Ulquiorra commented. Yamamoto's eyes widened when 5 more shadows touched down in a straight line next on either side of Ulquiorra. Stark, Haribel, Neutra, Grimjow, and Yami. The 7 remaining Espada had officially gathered in one spot for their final rendezvous with the Spirit King. Those that had been released had dropped it beforehand. Most of the divisions have been wiped out. Multiple captains are dead. Ulquiorra said. Behind Yamamoto and Naruto, the pillar crashed into the ground into the balcony, prepared to take the 7 Arrancar into the other dimension. And once they were there, the regular army could be brought in. For the first time, Yamamoto looked completely lost. It's over, Yamamoto. Soul Society is finished. You've lost, old fucker. Naruto guffawed, as he twisted the Zero energy from his Zero Espiral in his hands. He held Yamamoto in place before the old captain tried to avoid the attack, and prepared to release it. There's still something that bothers me, though. Throughout this entire invasion, I have not seen anyone I recognize from Konoha. It's almost like they're not here. Oh well, I guess I can hunt them later. See ya. Naruto said cheerfully. Yamamoto brought his arm back, going in for one more Ikatsu. Naruto sidestepped once again, and grabbed his wrist without so much as a fuss, the energy still swirling in his hands. He released the vortex that was a Zero and moved away as it embedded itself in Yamamoto's chest. The old captain glared at Naruto, defiant to the end. Without Ryujin Jaka, he was outclassed. Naruto was faster than he was, and had enough agility to avoid or counter any of his Hakuda. But he would not drop his pride in front of this brat. The Zero began to rip at him as the energy rendered asunder, and the Zero expanded further and further as a vortex of pure Ryuryoku, which was strong enough to nearly rip the surrounding balcony around to shreds, with everything in its way being destroyed. And Yamamoto was directly in the center of it. As the Zero Espiral consumed the Captain Commander of Soul Society, the Arrancar knew that they had won, and the Soul Society knew that they had lost. Naruto Uzumaki had managed the impossible, what no one had managed to do in over 1,000 years. The whole of Soul Society stood silent as the Orange Tempest raged over the First Division's barracks like an ominous storm, and the surrounding stone and wood began to peel away from the force. The 7 remaining Espada watched the scene unfold, as Yamamoto flopped around in the vortex of orange energy. The old captain's face was a mask of stoicism, even though the Zero rendered him asunder. Naruto was the exact opposite. He was grinning like a lunatic the entire time. The vortex raged for about a minute, before the orange energy of the Zero finally dispersed, and the balcony was completely in ruin. Naruto and the other Espada watched in pure silence, even as the Zero dissipated, and Yamamoto's body flopped onto the ground. He had been sliced clean in two, but the commander of the Shinigami had died, never allowing the pride of the Shinigami to be tarnished. Regardless, the strongest Shinigami had died. Naruto chuckled, before his chuckling turned into full-blown maniacal laughter, as he darted up and kicked the dead Shinigami in the face multiple times. How does it feel, old fuckhead? I beat you. I beat your soul society. I beat the Shinigami. You guys are all dead, and hollows are on the verge of taking your stupid paradise. He cackled once more, and even Grimmjow and Neutra started to laugh at their greatest triumph thus far. Haribel, Stark, and Ulquiorra merely stood in stony silence, while Yami also began to laugh stupidly at Soul Society's expense. All around them, Soul Society burned. Even now, the main Arrancar force was going around slaughtering any non-captain level Shinigami. Many of the captains were dead already. The Shinigami had lost, and the Hollows had won. It'd taken him over 300 years, but Naruto finally managed it. He had finally destroyed the Shinigami, and to prove it, he had personally killed their leader. Yet, there was still one final piece to the puzzle, which would be Naruto's biggest trial yet. Alright, there are 7 Espada left. Zamari and Sale bit the dust, and Barragan betrayed us, so I had to put him down. Not the result I would have liked, but we can still easily accomplish our goals with this many left. And now, our ride has arrived. Naruto said, addressing the other 6 Espada. The Royal Guard is strong. They are few in number, but they are strong. Fortunately, we will have as much help as we need, and it won't be necessary to kill the Royal Guard at this point. You just need to keep them out of the Royal Palace. As Naruto spoke, the doors to the large pillar in front of him opened. A young-looking woman with pink hair stepped out of the vehicle. Instead of the Vandenrake robes she wore earlier, she was now dressed in a white haori, with the symbol being 4 stars. It signified that she was a member of the Royal Guard. Sakura. Naruto muttered. He wasn't happy to see her, but at least she got the job done quickly. The other Espada didn't bat an eyelash. They already knew the purpose that Sakura brought them. So nice to see you again, Naruto-kun. Boo, and look. It feels a little bit sad, but you've managed to successfully kill Yamamoto Genryusai Shigekuni. And do I see fire in the background? By golly, you've really managed to tear Soul Society a new asshole, she raised her fist. We're not done yet, Sakura. We've got all the keys, but they won't be of any use if we are not able to defeat the other members of the Royal Guard. You're the Kido expert, do you have the main Garganta prepared? Yes, your army is free to come in at any time, as soon as we arrive, she giggled. Naruto growled at her behavior. Having someone near him as psychotic as himself could get annoying. Let's go. We can't back to the Royal Palace dimension this way, but fortunately the trip back isn't very problematic, regardless. We'll just have to take Shiba Kakaku's cannon by force. That's the way the Tenchurin can make it there. Let's see, 7 of you are making the trip. There should be plenty of room. Naruto nodded, much more subdued than in his celebration of his victory, but the other 6 Espada boarded the Tenchurin without a fuss. As the doors closed and the pillar took to the sky, the surviving Shinigami of Seirete were left to wonder just how they had lost the battle. A blanket was placed over the dead Yamamoto Genryusai's head. 2 captains stood over the fallen Shinigami, their eyes tinged with sadness. Those 2 were his first students, Kiraku Shunsui and Yukitake Jushiro. They had both suffered moderate wounds from their battles with Stark and Haribel, but they were able to move like normal. Those 2 Arrancar were far too merciful. Yamaji. Kiraku said. There was none of the usual pep to his voice. This time it was nothing but pure sadness. Yukitake didn't say anything, but his expression was the same. Regardless, both of them were extremely troubled by what Yamamoto's death would bring. What do we do now, Kurako? Yukitake asked rhetorically. He already knew the answer. Soul Society has lost. But those Arrancar are still out there, they're trying to take the royal palace. We just have to have faith in the strength of the royal guard, while staying behind and rebuilding. That's all we really do now, we're no match for them. Yet, if the royal guard fails to stop those Arrancar. He paused for a second, letting it sink in. We're all doomed. I would still like to know just where they came from. There was no indication of anything like this occurring. I thought that with the death of Aizen, there wouldn't be enough power in Huecomundo to directly challenge the Soul Society. And the Royal Guard. I saw the Tenchurin arrive not too long ago, and the remaining Espada boarding it. How did they manage to do that? Perhaps there's a traitor in the mix? Kurako offered. It was a troubling thought for the both of them, but it was the only possibility that they could think of at the time. It couldn't have come at a worse time either. Now that the Konoha Yukitake was cut off, as a garganta opened in the space where the wrecked balcony stood. It was wide enough to accommodate hundreds of people, which was the perfect amount for the Konoha Association. This doesn't sit right. All of a sudden we're invaded when a prime force of ours is gone. Speaking of which, it seems they've made it back here, but too little too late I suppose. Yukitake commented, as the garganta opened wider and wider. Kurako-san. Yukitake-san. The voice of their fellow captain Namikaze Minato rang out as the blonde-haired man exited the garganta that had been set up for them by Valakav. He had spotted the two senior captains the moment he had exited the portal, but it took him a few more minutes to notice the cold body that was at their feet. Ah! Minato! We're glad you're back. Kurako said, half-heartedly. Minato would have smiled at them, but his eyes were trained on the dead body of their leader that currently rested at their feet. Several other prominent members of the Konoha Association exited the garganta, and had a similar reaction to Minato when they first locked eyes with Yamamoto's corpse. What happened? Minato asked, still in shock. He didn't want to believe that his son the Hollow was currently the leader of a group of invaders, but it became pretty clear when he regarded the state of Seirete. Their leader lay dead, many buildings were demolished while corpses littered the street, and many areas of the Seirete were on fire. It was madness. When they left it was in perfect condition. Now, it looked like the apocalypse was upon them. Soul Society was an absolute wasteland. An invasion. Kurako said, pointing out the obvious. The Espada live on, they were biding their time, waiting for the right moment to strike, despite the fact that Aizen is long dead. We weren't prepared for them, and it cost us dearly. Yamaji was killed by their leader. Several other captains have been killed, and Kuratsuchi Taicho has been permanently disabled. This was an invasion we may never be able to recover from. I can't believe it. So Taicho. Kushina piped up. Her face was a mess of turmoil, for she had a sneaking suspicion who had killed Yamamoto and plunged Seirete into such turmoil. Where are the Arrancar now? We don't know how they did it, but they somehow took the Tenchurin to the royal palace. They are not satisfied with destroying Soul Society on its own, they are going after the Spirit King's head. Yukitake explained. What? Kushina screamed. We can do nothing more now than trust in the power of the Royal Guard to stop them. We have no way of following them or even getting in contact with the Royal Guard, but if they should somehow fail. Kurako-san, Yukitake-san, we intend to go after them. Minato pointed out. The rest of the Konoha Association stared at him dumbly, even his sensei and wife. We do. Jiraiya asked stupidly. Why? Kurako asked. He wasn't in the mind for games, none of them were. If I must admit something, I believe we all feel a certain amount of responsibility for allowing this to occur. We may have been played, but that doesn't change the fact that we were out hunting an elusive Hollow in little more than a revenge hunt while Soul Society was in its time of need. That is shameful in and of itself, but there's also the matter of what we have learned in our excursion into Huecomundo. Minato trailed off. Which is? Minato and Kushina's eyes were downcast, and the two senior captains noticed the change in atmosphere within the group. The leader of this group of hollows, and the one who had planned this invasion, he's my son. Vulpes C, otherwise known as Uzumaki Naruto. We've been looking for him for so long, and we finally found him. It just wasn't what we were expecting the result to be. It's alright, Minato-san. It's not your fault. Kurosaki Ichigo said, as he too stepped out of the Garganta and laid eyes upon the Captain Commander of Soul Society. This is a troubling revelation, Minato. He is the one who you have been searching for all this time. Kiraku commented. Don't feel like you have to take responsibility for any of this. What's done is done, we can't blame any single Shinigami for allowing this to happen. But we were played for fools. They coordinated this attack to happen while we were gone. We need to go after them, and with the Royal Guard. He trailed off, before he finally seemed to realize something. Akane and Taiki are there. There's a good chance that Naruto will run into them. We need to go and support them. Minato gushed. His son and daughter were members of the Royal Guard, and if the Royal Guard were to be fighting the Arrancar, I see that nothing can be done to stop, regardless of Soul Society's rebuilding phase. However, there is more to this than simple politics. I do not know how the Arrancar have managed to invade the Royal Palace, but it should be clear to all of you that Shinigami of the Godai 13 cannot enter that dimension as they please. Yukitake said. Not so fast, Yukitake. While it is true that Shinigami of the Godai 13 cannot enter the dimension at will, it is true that the Godai May 13th send a distress signal to the Royal Guard in times of crisis. Whether they decide to respond or not is up to them, but at the very least it is something that may open the way to the Royal Palace. And it just so happens that Yamaji got desperate enough to send a signal to the Royal Guard not too long after the invasion began. Kiraku piped up. Are you serious, Kiraku-san? Kushina asked. She had heard of a rule like that, but she couldn't recall when the signal had ever been used. In fact, except for when her children came back on their very rare leave, she never had any contact with the Royal Guard or the Spirit King's dimension. I don't know if they'll come or not, though. They may already have their hands full with. He was cut off, before his eyes turned to the skies overhead. Well, speak of the devil. Just like shortly before, a long white pillar became visible soaring through the sky, though it was clear that this one was not full of traitors and/or Arrancar. There was no way they were done invading the dimension. The new Tenchurin behaved in an eerily familiar manner to the first one. It almost impacted at the same exact spot where the first one had landed and had taken the 7 Arrancar to the Royal Palace. They're actually here. Yukitake said, not bothering to hide the surprise in his voice. You would think that all of them would be a little more occupied at the moment. Like the Tenchurin from before, the gigantic pillar opened, and the Konoha Association gasped in awe as they laid eyes upon members of the Royal Guard. For some of the higher-up members such as the Namikazes, Shikamaru, Kiba, and company, a light smile made its way on their faces as they saw the two figures descend from the pillar. Helpful allies had come their way. Hey, what's up, everybody? Things going well, a raucous male voice trumpeted from one of the figures, and the one on the right stepped out into view. Read the scene, idiot. Does this look like everything's going okay? A much calmer female voice chastised from the left figure. She too stepped out into view. Akane. Taiki. Minato called out. He would recognize his children's voice from anywhere. The red-haired twins came into view of the Konoha Association, some of whom regarded them with awe. After all, they were the greatest pride of the Konoha Association, but they were rarely ever seen due to their status. Dad! Taiki called out, rushing up to his father. Akane on the other hand calmly walked up to her father, and with a serious look, she nodded with an acknowledgement of his presence. It was strange, the way the twins had grown up and grown different during their time in the Royal Guard. When they were kids, Akane had always been the hyperactive one, while Taiki had been a shy, calm, and rational boy. As they spent time in the Zero Division, it seemed like their personalities had switched. Akane in particular was much colder and calculating, while Taiki had turned wild. "Are you alright?" Minato asked. The twins looked confused. "Why wouldn't we be alright?" Taiki pointed out. "Because, you don't know yet, do you?" Kiba said, regarding the two twins. "We don't know what, exactly?" Akane asked, her eyes narrowing. "We came here because Soul Society requested our help, and we're the only ones who agreed to go. We didn't expect to see Soul Society in ruin, nor all of you here with us." "What happened?" Minato sighed. "Sit down, you two. This is a long story, and we don't have much time to tell it. So much is at stake here. First of all, let me be the first to tell you that Soul Society has been destroyed, and we were not here. We were in Hueco idiotically hunting down a targeted hollow, who at the same time is the one responsible for this entire disaster. We just got back. We know about your proposed invasion. You were planning on hunting down Vulpes C, but we didn't realize that you guys were all ready to do it." Taiki pointed out. "That's not all. What I'm about to tell you may come as a big surprise, and something you may not want to hear. We've been searching for your brother for a long time now, and you're well aware of the lengths we'd go to find him." Akane's eyes snapped open. "Naruto? Our brother, does that mean you found him?" she asked. She had a bad feeling about where this was going. Kushina burst into tears again, and many of Naruto's friends began to look solemn. "Yes. Vulpes C, the one who destroyed the village of Konoha, is also the mastermind behind this entire invasion, and by the looks of it, he succeeded. Vulpes C is Naruto. Vulpes C the Hollow is your brother." Minato finally choked out. The two Zero Division members stood there in stunned silence. Even Akane's mouth was hanging open. "What?" Taiki spluttered. Yukitake and Kiraku had not said a single word during the entire monologue by Minato, but even they had to weigh in on this state of affairs. "That boy you've been looking for so long, your son, he's behind all this. The son of a captain," Yukitake commented. "So all this time we've been looking for a hollow. Judging by his actions, it's clear he has no love for us," Akane pointed out. "Based on what he's done, we're going to have to kill him," she said, with no hesitation. She had never even met her older brother, so she didn't have the same reservations as her parents might. Minato, Kushina, and Naruto's old friends winced at the blunt revelation. That statement was likely very true. Naruto chose his side over 3 centuries ago, and he hadn't looked back ever since. It just wasn't a thought that they liked to think about. "Where is he now?" Akane asked, her voice dangerous. "That's just it," Kiraku piped up. "You came at likely the worst possible time. Since they have already finished invading the Soul Society, there's one more possible destination for those Arankar. The Spirit King." "What? We can't hang around here, after all. We need to get back to our duties, immediately. Let's go, Taiki," Akane ordered to her brother, who frowned at her, but didn't necessarily disagree. "But, what about everyone here?" he asked. "No time. I know we haven't seen everyone in such a long time, but our Lord needs our assistance. We probably shouldn't have even left our cities, because our mistake may cost everyone in this world." Akane wasted no time in climbing back into the Tenchurin, without even saying goodbye or anything to her parents and the rest of the Konoha Association. "Wait, Akane!" Minato called after her. This could have been their one true chance to pursue Naruto, and they were not about to let it fall from their grasp. Akane stopped in her tracks, but otherwise did not acknowledge Minato's voice. "Take us with you. All of us. We want to confront Naruto." "Dad, as much as I respect your skills as a Shinigami, you know as well as anyone that unauthorized Shinigami are not allowed inside the Spirit King's palace. Not to mention, we cannot fit so many people inside the Tenchurin. Even if I granted that request, only about 10 or so members could fit alongside us in there. Then just take as many as you can. Please, Akane. We feel responsible for this. Kushina piped up. Maybe we should take them along, Akane. This invasion doesn't sit right with me, we may need all the help we can get. Taiki commented, to his much stricter sister. Akane sighed. Fine, we'll take this along. But if things go south quickly, you're going to take the fall for this, got it? She told her brother, who nodded with an idea of seriousness. We leave immediately. We cannot waste any more time here. Who knows what may be occurring in the royal palace while those Arrancar are there. The other members of the royal guard are strong, but judging from the destruction around Soul Society, there has never been an invasion like this. I have a bad feeling about this. Minato nodded to his daughter, before turning back to the rest of the Konoha Association, which were huddled up on the balcony of the First Division, looking solemn. Needless to say, no matter what happens from this point on, things will never be the same. Naruto has done irreparable damage to the Soul Society, and in a way we are the ones responsible for it. But, we must do whatever it takes to stop him. All of you back there. He was gesturing to the bulk of the Konoha Association. Those who had never known Naruto in life, and had come to Soul Society long after Pain's invasion. I cannot drag you into this. You accompanied me to Hueco and for that I am thankful. But, I think it would be best for all of you to stay behind and help with the rebuilding of Seireite. Kushina. Jiraiya-sensei. Tsunade-sama, all of Naruto's friends from Konoha. I would be very thankful if you were to accompany me to the Spirit Palace. If we all confront Naruto himself over this, we may have a chance at winning. You don't need to say anything, Minato. All of us feel the same way. We want to stop Naruto, no matter what it takes for us to do so. With that being said, we will accompany you to the Royal Palace. I would like to come along with you, Minato-san. I have gone far too long without seeing the human world or Soul Society. I don't want them to be destroyed, Ichigo pointed out. Minato regarded him carefully, before nodding. Then let us hurry. Akane piped up. No more time for conversation. All of you who are coming, please step inside the Tenchurin. We will have to travel to the Shiba complex, and using Shiba Kakaku's cannon to reach the royal palace. We have no time to waste. With Kiraku and Yukitake watching, and the majority of the Konoha Association waiting behind, those who would decide the fate of Soul Society stepped inside the Tenchurin. Minato, Kushina, Jiraiya, Tsunade, Rin, Hinata, Shikamaru, Kiba, Niji, and Ino, along with Ichigo. Those 11 would assist the royal guard in their endeavor, along with Akane and Taiki. Akane herself sighed one last time, before closing the door to the large pillar. The remaining Shinigami watched as the pillar took to the sky, rapidly in pursuit of the renegade Naruto. The citizens of Rukongai did not even know what was happening. It had been a weird day for all of them, and at the end of it, they were confused. They had been taught for their entire afterlives that the Seireite was untouchable. That no one could defeat it. Yet, the Seireite had duly been defeated. Quite soundly at that. And now, with the Seireite in shambles, they were stunned when they saw a large white pillar soar across the skies like a divine chariot, followed by another identical one only hours after. It seemed that it was in hot pursuit of the previous one. Within the pillar, there were 12 different Shinigami, each one of various strength and skill levels. Yet, they all had origins that traced back to the same village. Minato, Kushina, Jiraiya, Tsunade, Rin, Niji, Hinata, Shikamaru, Kiba, and Ino, along with the royal guard members Akane and Taiki. Everything seemed okay within the pillar for them, other than the fact that it was slightly cramped. I hope nothing bad has happened to the Shiba. Hinata pointed out. It was fairly rare for one as quiet as her to initiate a conversation, but nonetheless, she said something that had been on all of their minds. Knowing the nature of these Arrancars, I have a bad feeling about them. Shiba Kakaku has a nasty temper, and when someone like Naruto intrudes on her property demanding the use of the cannon, it won't end well. Besides that, there's no way that she will willingly lend aid to creatures such as Arrancar. Niji responded to her. The Tenchurin continued to soar across the upper districts of Rukongai, the tension in the air forcing them to not create any conversation past that point. Eventually, the strange sight of the Shiba complex came into view, though it wasn't like they could miss it. What was more bothersome for that was the fact that the house as well as the giant stone hands that served to decorate the area were all in ruins. The Keikaku cannon was the only thing that remained intact. There was no sign of another Tenchurin. Oh, crap, looks like we were too late. We can only hope Shiba Kakaku is still alive at this point, because if she's not, we may be in a bit of a bind. Jiraiya commented. Bring it down, Akane. Taiki said. Akane did just that, pressing a few buttons on the dashboard, which killed the power to the Tenchurin and brought it down onto the lawn of the Shiba complex. The dozen Shinigami all exited the vehicle, while a few of them stayed behind to tend it in preparation for the launching back to the royal palace. Akane and Taiki, along with their parents, entered the ruined Shiba complex. The halls were in severe disarray, and many priceless Shiba artifacts were thrown off the wall. The two bodyguards and servants of the Shiba complex lay either dead or unconscious, and the Namikaze family proceeded down the hallway with a heavy heart. The sliding door to the main room of Shiba Kakaku was sliced in half, and the wood and paper that decorated the door were ripped and thrown apart by the chaos. Wasting no time, Akane entered the room. Her brother and parents followed not long after. They were met with a chaotic scene similar to the one that had occurred outside. Asshole! How dare that asshole do this? Kakaku-san! Taiki exclaimed, shocked at the grisly scene. Ganja lay over to the side a ways. Apparently he had tried to fight the Arrancar. He was unconscious or dead, but they didn't have enough time to figure out which. Kakaku was in bad shape, however. Taiki, Akane, what are you two doing here? And why are Minato and Kushina here as well? Kakaku asked. The normally fessity woman lay heavily injured in a pile of her own blood. Minato could already guess what had happened. Naruto or another Arrancar had done this. They had probably demanded the use of the Keikaku cannon, and when the temperamental Kakaku decided to give them a piece of her mind, Naruto lost his patience. Kakaku obviously would be no match for him. What happened here? Taiki asked, cradling Kakaku's body gently. The woman grit her teeth together ferociously. She seemed more angry than she should be considering her injuries. Arrancar. 7 of them. They arrived here just hours ago using a Tenchurin. I thought it would be you two considering no Arrancar's ever been able to use that vehicle, but it was Arrancar. And a traitor to the Zero Division. Anyway, they demanded the use of my Keikaku cannon. They wanted to storm the royal palace. Obviously, I refused, but their leader, he did this to me. And using the strong Kido of the traitorous member of the royal guard, they have managed to use my Keikaku cannon. They are in the royal palace right now. A traitorous member of the royal guard? Who would do that? Minato asked. Akane and Taiki also seemed rather interested in this type of news. A traitor to the royal guard would definitely make this invasion far more possible for the Arrancar. Sakura. Haruno Sakura is the traitor. She was in league with those Arrancars all this time, and with her Kido, there's no way they wouldn't be able to invade the royal palace. What? Sakura! Kushina exclaimed, her mouth hanging wide open. Sakura was apparently Naruto's teammate in life, so Kushina had trusted her. She had always seemed a little aloof, but not the type of person who would think of betraying the Soul Society. Sakura, she's the newest member of the Royal Guard. The Spirit King thought there should be some expansion, and the consensus was that Haruno would be taken into the guard. A Tenchurin disappeared right before we came down here, but we didn't bother to check who had left before coming down. The new Royal Guard member, this is a disaster. Akane mumbled. Anyway, Sakura's betrayal is not important right now. We're on borrowed time as it is. Kakaku-san, we are very sorry to ask this of you in such a state, but there is a troublesome thing occurring right now. We'd like to go the royal palace as quickly as can be. Taiki told her, his voice one of authority. Troublesome things, huh? Well, I sure do love troublesome things, but not at the cost of getting me nearly killed. I really am boiling with hatred of those Arankar. Allow me to do everything I can to help you in your mission. We are all very grateful for your bravery and your determination, Kakaku-san. We will not let you down this time. Taiki told her, before letting her down gently. Kakaku winced slightly as she tried and struggled to bring herself to her feet, her determination not failing her where her body did. I swear I'll get the lot of you up there to the royal palace. Just promise me one thing. Promise me that you'll really stick it to that blonde asshole while you're up there. I owe him a smack. And boom. We're done. Your army will be arriving shortly. There's no way my comrades will be able to ignore such a massive wave of hollows able to threaten the Spirit King. Though, I hope you're prepared for a massive loss of numbers while you're here. It doesn't matter. Valakav should be able to raise the morale of them regardless of how many are lost. I'm more concerned about what happens if any of these guys are attacked. He gestured back. The other 6 remaining Espada stood steadfast. The other members of the Royal Guard had probably been alerted to their presence, but it was far too late for that. The invasion of the Royal Palace had officially begun. This was a very large area for a pocket dimension, and Naruto had never really seen anything like it before. They were currently floating on a disc that suspended high above the vestibule road far below, but the disc was not some small flat expanse. Rather, it was an entire city, with many empty buildings high above the expanse. There were several other discs floating high above the ground, each of which contained their own city. The disc they were was Sakura's own personal city, her own personal quarters that had been granted to her just a couple of days ago. Naruto looked off into the distance. There was an enormous cylindrical building directly to the northwest of their position. That was the Greater Soul King Palace, and it was where the Soul King resided with his family. It was also the place that Naruto had been longing for, and where he would finish his lifelong goal. All 13 keys were in his pocket now. Sakura's city was quite unique and different than the other cities that floated around the Soul King's dimension. It was very sleek and metallic in design, giving it a very futuristic feel to it. There were flashing lights of multiple colors hanging above the doorways to the buildings, which were unoccupied. The only purpose they served was to provide safe facilities for which to practice and experiment with new kinds of Kido. The main building at the center, a large dome-like structure, was where the Arankar and Sakura currently resided. They were on the top floor, where the walls consisted of nothing more than a domed window, which granted them a full view of the Spirit King's dimension. A panel was the only thing that was set up in this room, at the center of it. There was a groove which looked like it fit Sakura's hand perfectly, with several lines that glowed with a blue energy running up it. Naruto and the other Espada watched Sakura work in stony silence. This was all part of the plan, and was the reason why Valakav and the rest of the Hollow Army had remained stationed within Huecomundo, waiting for their chance to be useful. The other non-Espada Arankar were left to clean up the mess in Serete. It was already done, but when Sakura had put her hand in that panel and channeled her Ryatsu, there was a change that occurred. Based upon the spike in her Ryatsu, she was using some kind of Kido, one that Naruto and the other Espada recognized immediately. The Garganta. It was how the Hollow Army would get here to the Royal Palace. As soon as Sakura placed her hand inside that panel and chanted the Kido, there was a rumble that resonated throughout the entire Royal Palace. It wasn't just a regular Garganta, it was a Garganta that was on a much larger scale than any Garganta the Hollows had ever seen before. This Shinigami had managed to take the Garganta and magnify it tenfold. It's done now. The Garganta is open. We are prepared to storm the Royal Palace and turn the cycle. I will accompany you on this, and it's up to you to decide whether they. She pointed to the other Espada, will be coming too. Yes, you stupid bitch. We are ready. You guys will all be coming with me. There's no real enemy to fight here, and once we get the cycle turned, everything will be ours for the taking. The key to our success lies within the Greater Soul King Palace. Let's go. How lame. We're just gonna go there without fighting anyone. Grimmjow complained. Ulquiorra shook his head at the bloodthirsty Arrancar. Yeah, I want to kill more people as much as you, Grimmjow, but as long as we're here, we need to fulfill the objective as soon as possible. It's very likely we may run into strong opponents on the way, though. Vestibule Road leads directly into the Great Spirit King Palace, but be careful not to run into any other members of the Royal Guard on the way. They'll be distracted by the hollows. Sakura explained. Yeah, let's just go. Naruto snarled. With a quick flash of his sword, he broke the surrounding area, and with his Arrancar air walking technique, he stepped outside into the windy torrent. The moment he did so, two things happened at nearly the exact same time. The first was far more beneficiary to his cause. He saw the black void of the Garganta open, but what a scale it was. The portal covered like skies like a shroud, opening up to reveal the empty space of the Garganta void, which housed millions of hollows within its depths. No doubt the Royal Guard was locked onto that void now, for from within its depths, it began spilling hollows. Thousands of hollows spilled forth from the black void to land down on Vestibule Road far below. And there were many, many hollows that made up his army. There were regular hollows, Gillians, Ajuchas, along with hollows of all shapes, sizes, and abilities. When they landed, they did not waste a single second. They stormed to the palace at a rate that a force of that size could realistically do, but their main concern was not to take the palace. Rather, when speeding dots emerged from the other cities and traveled down to Vestibule Road. Those speeding dots were taking out dozens of hollows at a time, but it wasn't enough to slow down the invasion force. The Royal Guard is down there. Individually, those hollows don't stand a chance, but with their numbers they can at least keep the Royal Guard from getting to the Soul King. It's taking all they have to keep them from breaking into the lower sanctum. This is where we come in. We'll breach the upper sanctum. Let's go. Naruto cried. With the lower level of the dimension occupied by both sides almost fully, Naruto and the Espada were easily able to attack the upper level. There was a long, wide stretch of levitating stone that led to the palace far above the Vestibule Road. It was also where they had parked their own Tenchurin. When Naruto and his minions were running along the white stone road leading to the upper sanctum, the second surprising thing occurred, in quick succession to the arrival of the hollows. A second Tenchurin came rocketing across the sky at a high rate, darting past the 7 Arrancar and 1 Shinigami. Sakura's eyes widened as she picked up on some stunning Ryatsu. Shit! That's Akane and Taiki. They must have left not long after me to go to Serete. But that's not all. I'm sensing some very strong Ryatsus coming from within. Sakura pointed out. Shit! Naruto, I have something to tell you about that Tenchurin. All the people that are in it, it's your family, and your old friends from Konoha. Naruto stopped in place, just as he about to enter the Greater Soul King Palace. The Tenchurin impacted heavily upon the wide road they were on, right next to the Tenchurin that they had landed on the other side of the road. Naruto's eyes were wide, and he rubbed his mask fragments while fondling with the cutlass at his side. His brain was throbbing furiously as the thoughts began to become coherent. Even Sakura gave him a wide berth as a slithering orange Ryatsu was emitted from his body. He chuckled darkly, his voice deeper than even Ulquiorra had ever heard it. What a wonderful surprise. I'm flattered, truly. Naruto cackled, his voice raised several octaves up from the chuckle earlier. He turned around, showing the other Espada his bloodshot eyes. His skin was clammier, and when he grinned, they swore they saw cruel sharp black teeth underneath his scowl. Everyone backed off, and gave him a wide berth as Naruto began to pace slowly but surely down the long road over to where the Tenchurin was. Before he could go any further, Sakura's arm grasped him around the neck. Stop, Naruto. There will be time for that later. Right now, you have to get those 13 keys into the top tower of the Greater Soul King Palace. Do that, and you can take all the time you need slaughtering them. Right now, let us handle them. You better get that arm off of me if you don't want to lose it. Naruto hissed. Even Sakura, with all her mental issues, managed to flinch at the tone in Naruto's voice. Naruto, she tried. Someone roared, but this time it was not Naruto. The sudden roar seemed to break everyone out of their stupor as the Konoha Shinigami got out of their Tenchurin. No one on the Arrancar's side said anything as the largest Arrancar among them lumbered down the wide road towards the Tenchurin, huffing and puffing. He drew his Zanpakuto. Get pissed, segunda etapa, Ira. Throwing caution to the wind, Yami seemed to finally have enough of sitting on the sidelines. So he rushed the first targets he could possibly find, not caring about the wrath of the Primera later on. His sword exploded into a burst of red light as he drew it and called his release command, but he was through with holding back. He was going to go segunda etapa from the start. Luckily, the road was very wide enough to accommodate his massive size and weight, but it wouldn't hold if he decided to start thrashing around like an idiot. That idiot! What's he doing? Naruto called out. Yami's stupidity had thrust him right back into the real world, and he was no longer focused on just killing his family. Rather, he was livid over what Yami was doing. Nonetheless, Yami kept on doing what he was doing. He activated his second release, and using his large size, he covered the distance over to the Konoha Shinigami almost immediately. This is madness, Akane pointed out. When the Tenchurin arrived within the royal palace, they had expected to find an Arrancar invasion of relatively small numbers, with those small numbers being particularly competent fighters. She didn't expect this. Thousands, if not millions of hollows were crowding the vestibule road far below where the Tenchurin landed. The Ryatsu was a cacophony of noise, but she could very clearly make out the members of her fellow royal guard far below. They were doing everything they could to prevent the palace being stormed, but it seemed that more hollows just kept swarming in. What is going on here? Ichigo asked, as he stepped out of the Tenchurin. Other members of the Konoha Association stepped out as well, with Minato and Kushina entering the Spirit King's dimension for the very first time. Is that? Ichigo trailed off, as he pointed down the very wide road all the way to the cylindrical building in the back. Right in front of him, there seemed to be people at a distance. I don't know how they managed to get those hollows here, but we made a mistake. We should have been here, Taiki pointed out. His sister couldn't help but agree with him. Minato's attention was drawn suddenly by Ichigo's proclamation. He wrapped his arm around Kushina, gesturing to the small figures off in the distance. There seemed to be 8 of them, but within that group, there would no doubt be Naruto. However, they couldn't dwell on this, as a particularly large Arrancar began to rush at them like he was mad. He jumped in the air as much as his large body would allow, before all of them felt a large spike in Ryatsu. Wah! Kiba asked suddenly, as the Ryatsu covered Yami, and his body began to morph. How troublesome! Muttered Shikamaru, as the impact from a huge Arrancar rattled the road they were on and almost made a couple of them lose balance. Why is it so huge? Jiraiya asked. He had never seen a hollow this big before, and the fact that Naruto had one within his army didn't comfort him. Besides, everyone in the Konoha Association could see the large, black 10 that was tattooed on the Arrancar's giant chest. It's an espada. They're here, everyone. Ichigo pointed out. I've seen that one before, but I don't remember him ever being this big, Ichigo stated. Several members of the Konoha Shinigami had already drawn their swords. Yami was as big as advertised, but his second release added to his girth a little bit. The Decima looked a bit like a cross between an ape and a dinosaur. He stood on 2 legs, his chest very broad and muscular like an ape's, but magnified to an impossibly large scale. His skin was brown in color, similar to his first release, but his mask had changed. Now it covered almost all of his face, with 4 long spikes sticking out of the back end. Yeah. You weak-ass babies get to die by the hands of Yami. Here it comes, he roared, as he reared back and threw a slow yet powerful punch directly down upon the Tenchurin. Oh, for crying out loud! Taiki muttered. His Zanpakuto, a long katana at his hip, was drawn from its sheath. Its hilt was a deep blue, with the guard of it 2 curvatures that thrust out of the sword like wings. With a well-placed shuanpa, he met the Decima in mid-air, and with a quick precision, he got in front of the large Aaronkar. After he had done that, he managed to lop off the massive arm with very little effort. Oh! Yami cried out in pain. You weak little insect! How dare you! I'll crush you all! Yami roared. If he had wanted to, Taiki could have finished off Yami right then and there, but instead, he sheathed his Zanpakuto. This is a waste of time, and I'm not even going to bother. This should be something you could take of, alright? He asked, going to the back of the Tenchurin. Why didn't you finish him off? Akane asked her brother. Taiki grinned at her. I wanted to look cool, he proclaimed. Akane sighed. Anyway, I'm sorry. Dad, Mom, I apologize for this. It seems that right now the other members of the Royal Guard are trapped in a fight with what seems to be millions of hollows. We brought you here like you wanted, but now we have to go fulfill our duty and keep those hollows from invading the Greater Palace. You'll have to meet with Naruto without us. Taiki told them. Yeah, that's fine. We should be able to handle it on our own. Just go down there and help your fellows. This situation isn't looking very good. Minato told them. Without another word, the 2 siblings leapt off the bridge to the Greater Palace, and down into the endless mob of hollows. We'll try and finish up as soon as we can, and then go back you up if you need it. Taiki called back to his parents. Minato gave him a thumbs up. Now that we're here, what do we do with this troublesome Aaronkar? Shikamaru asked, the question that was on everybody's mind. Yami was still reeling in pain from the loss of his arm, but considering the number 10 on his chest, he seemed to be the weakest Espada. He's coming again. Hinata commented. Indeed, the Decima Espada was starting to get over the loss of his right arm, and was preparing to attack again. We don't have time for this. Stand back, everyone. I'll do this. Minato told all of his subordinates. Everyone there, from Jiraiya to Kushina to Niji, stood back as they watched the former 4th Hokage and current 5th Division captain draw his Zanpakuto. It was a normal katana, the most common of all Zanpakuto. The hilt was a bright yellow, with a guard shaped like jagged zigzagging line that wasn't quite a lightning bolt. But within the core of the Shinigami powers, there was so much more. Gleam, Kiroi Senko. There was a bright flash of yellow Ryatsu that emanated from Minato's sword, showering the surrounding area in a pure yellow light. What the fuck? Yami shouted rudely, covering his face with one of his massive arms. The rest of the Konoha Association looked in awe at the 5th Division captain, and his legendary Shurkai. The Shurkai of Minato's Zanpakuto was very similar to his sealed state, if you were looking at the hilt. The hilt was the same as always, but where the blade once was emerged a long, slender beam of yellow energy, similar in structure to the Quincy's Seal Schneider, though it was much more uniform, and unlike Seal Schneider, it was a pure sword and nothing but. Bright, what do you plan on doing with that thing? Yami asked. Minato didn't say anything for a few seconds, before he addressed the Decima Espada. Sorry, Aaronkar, but I don't have time to chat with you. My son is directly behind you right now, and I need to get to him as soon as possible. I will finish this up quickly. Minato grunted as he swung his sword diagonally, not even coming close to hitting Yami. Yami scratched his head for a couple minutes, before he laughed out loud. Huh? What was that? That he cut off, before there was a burst of hot air followed by a beam of light which materialized directly in the center of Yami's stomach. Blag, the Decima cried out, as the beam of light that materialized from Minato's sword punched a hole in Yami that very nearly cut the gigantic Arrancar in two. Blood poured from the wound in buckets as the gigantic Arrancar lost his balance. With his big body, he flopped over the side of the bridge, landing with a thud down below, where the hollows were trying to move their way towards the greater palace. "Alright, let's move on," Minato stated, reverting his sword back to its sealed state and sheathing it. The other Shinigami looked at him and shuddered, most of them anyway. "That's one scary Shirkai. That big guy didn't even stand a chance," Kiba commented. "Be careful. That Arrancar was an Espada, but from the looks of things, he was the 10th one. That means he was the weakest of all the Espada. It's likely there will be tougher opponents from this point on. Right now, we need to move. Find Naruto." Minato didn't need to tell them twice, as they noticed one of the Arrancar over on the far side of the road began walking to them. Minato's mouth went dry as the Arrancar came closer to them. He had spiky blonde hair. That idiot. Ulquiorra was as blunt as usual, but there was no denying to anyone there that what Yami had pulled was incredibly stupid. The big Arrancar was incredibly stupid after all, and Ulquiorra supposed that it was only a matter of time before Yami got tired of following Naruto's rules and just went out in his own. As a result, it had gotten him killed. "Well, that was quite the display," Haribel commented, a rare initiation of conversation from her. Honestly, they had seen the blonde man activate his Shirkai from this great distance, and take out Yami with barely a thought. "That's my shitty dad. I knew he was always a talented Shinigami, but this was Yami's own fault that he charged in like that. There was no avoiding the result. This wasn't the result I wanted, but whatever. We're here already. As much as I'd love to confront all those motherfuckers right now, I know I simply don't have the time for it. If the Royal Guard don't remain distracted by the Hollow Army, then this will all be useless." However, Naruto sighed before he stepped forward. "Naruto? What are you doing?" Sakura asked. "I'm gonna go leave them a present, you see," Naruto said enthusiastically. "Stay here. All of you," he ordered, before he bounded off down the suspended bridge over to where the Tenchirans lay. The Espada sat there in stony silence. Naruto himself saw his hated family and former friends get closer and closer as he ran. The looks on their faces changed from indifference to shock and horror as he approached. "He's coming. Naruto is coming," Kiba shouted out over the din, as they watched the blonde-haired, red-eyed Arrancar rapidly close the distance between them. The bunch of Shinigami murmured amongst themselves as Naruto slowed down significantly, to the point where his speed decreased to a slow walk along the road. He was very close to them now. No one said a single word, the tension in the air was thick enough to be cut with a knife. And when he arrived in full, the Konoha Association got their first glimpse of Naruto for over 300 years. They were surprised by how little he changed. All of them had at least aged somewhat, but other than the Arrancar changes, there wasn't much change in Naruto's appearance. Of course he had the mask fragments, and his eyes were permanently red now, but other than that he looked like the same exact 16-year-old that had died all those years ago. Kushina's eyes began to water, while all of Naruto's former friends began to gape at the Arrancar in front of them. Appearance-wise he was similar, but his demeanor and the way he carried himself were so different. When they looked at him, it was like looking into an abyss. He carried himself with such a mark of malice and death that it was practically washing off of him in waves. "Naruto. It's you." Minato coughed out. He didn't really know what else to say. Hinata burst into tears, while several of Naruto's other former friends just stood there with their mouths open. "Me? Well, yeah, guess it is me," Naruto said after the long silence ended. He noticed Hinata shuffle up to where his father was, and a red-headed woman that Naruto didn't recognize. "Naruto, your mother and I have been searching for you for such a long time. And, you're a hollow," Minato said awkwardly. So, that's my mother. Whatever, I'm still gonna kill her. Wow, everyone's here. Naruto whistled. Besides his parents, there was Ero Sennin, Tsunade-chan, Shikamaru, Hinata, Niji, the works. It was a glorious reunion. Naruto, do you realize what you're doing? What you have done? Minato asked. Yeah. I've invaded the Soul Society, killed countless Shinigami, and have now invaded the royal palace. I've been wanting to do this for 3 centuries now, of course I know what I'm doing. The way he said those things with such nonchalance made them flinch. But, why? Why? That's the question, isn't it all of you, that's why. I hate all of you so much, and you guys. He pointed towards the back, to where Naruto's former friends were standing. I saw it all, and heard it all. He stated dangerously. Naruto's friends looked at him, confused. Perhaps it didn't occur to you at the time. He said dangerously, as he paced around them all like a predator scouting out its prey. But I was there when I died, in Konoha. As a plus. It was a very short time I endured as a plus, because I became a hollow right after that. Does anyone want to guess why? He asked rhetorically. He had them all in the palms of his hands. No one dared say anything. Well, when I was an innocent little plus, I thought all of you were my friends. But then, I happened to hear all that slander from those I considered precious to me. And to top it all off, I saw with my own eyes what that old fuckhead did to my dead body, how he mass-produced a load of living weapons, and you all did nothing to stop it. Do you remember that now, huh? He asked angrily. His former friends were staring at him with shock. He had been there to witness all of that. I became a hollow and channeled all of my hatred towards the village of Konoha. When the Shinigami got in my way of destroying Konoha, they became hated targets as well. But luckily, I have destroyed Konoha already, and am right on track with the second goal, destroying Soul Society, and all of you. He pointed to them, before he laughed madly. Naruto-kun, a normally shy, feminine voice spoke up surprisingly loudly. Naruto turned around, putting his back to all of them. Naruto-kun, look at me. Hinata scolded, tears welling up in her eyes. The Arrancar turned back around, regarding the girl that had a crush on him all these years. What? So you're saying, you turned into a hollow because of the way Konoha treated your honor? You could say that, yes. Naruto pointed out. His voice was becoming much quieter, and the rest of the Konoha Association was beginning to wonder what Hinata's plan was. Poor Naruto-kun, you have suffered so much. Hinata cooed, her voice getting much quieter and softer. Naruto raised an eyebrow, before a look of bewilderment spread itself upon his face. What? Do you have any idea who I am? What I've done, he told Hinata, his voice cracking significantly as he raised it in volume. She's trying to appeal to him using pity and emotion. Naruto's a hollow, he doesn't understand these sorts of things, so he's getting very confused. He doesn't have any idea how to respond to this. Minato said. Honestly, it was actually pretty dangerous what Hinata was doing, but Naruto seemed to be getting out of it. He had no idea what to do. I don't care. To me, you'll always be Naruto-kun. You may have done many horrible things, but on the inside, you're just lonely and sad. You never wanted to become a hollow. If it were even possible, Hinata's voice managed to get even softer. The other members of the Konoha Association were on edge, but they seemed to be in support of what Hinata was doing, as Naruto's Ryatsu reached an all-time low, and he slumped to his knees. It was incredible, Hinata was disabling him with just her words. Naruto punched the ground in frustration. Make it stop. Please. Don't say anything more. To the surprise of everyone present, Hinata took a step forward. She went up to the fallen Arrancar, and knelt down before him. She was beginning to cross the line, but the rest of the Konoha Association were too mesmerized to stop her. It's all right. Naruto-kun. You don't have to be sad anymore. All of the things you did, you can never put those things behind you, but you'll always have someone that cares about you. If there's any place for you to start over, then I would call Soul Society the perfect place. But I'm still a hollow. At this point, Hinata did the most surprising thing of all. She hugged him. It all happened at once, it seemed like. Naruto was on his knees, looking at the ground in despair, before Hinata just went up and hugged him directly out of nowhere. Naruto screamed. He didn't know how to respond, but Hinata shushed him with her words, cooing at him gently as he settled into her embrace. Minato was stunned. They were all stunned. Naruto was completely disabled. Hinata smiled, the look in her lavender eyes a look of endearment. Her arms were fully wrapped around Naruto, and as she held him, she felt something wet douse the fabric of her robe. Is he crying? Minato asked himself. There, Naruto-kun. It's alright, you don't have to do those things anymore. Hinata told him. Naruto sniffed, tears rushing down his face, before he nodded. Thank you. Hinata. I'm so. He trailed off, pulling his face from Hinata's chest. I'm so happy, he roared, locking eyes with Hinata. The look on his face was an absolute nightmare, and all of the tears that he had been crying before were gone. He was not crying. Hinata stood there in shock, as Naruto extended his arm and thrust his powerful fist straight through her chest. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you enjoyed this what if and want to see next part of it, comment down below and let me know. Also share this video with your friends. See you in the next video. Peace.